Hey everybody, welcome to another Post Status Live. I've got my good friend Chris Lema here, and we are like 6 days from seeing each other in person in Cabo, Mexico, or 7 days. I'm not doing math very well, but we've got some. Well, Chris and Liquid Web and Stellar WP have got some big news to share, and I'll let you break it. But thanks, Chris, for jumping on today. We're going to be talking about online learning, and you'll see why in just a second.
So we have officially acquired LearnDash. So that's the big news. LearnDash will become the whole team, the whole product, everything will become tucked in under our Stellar WP brand, owned by Liquid Web, and I will be stepping in as the GM of LearnDash.
That's fantastic news. Huge, huge. I mean, I think about LearnDash. I'm a customer, by the way. I was telling Matt Danner the other day, I said, seems like you guys are buying everything I'm a customer of, which I'm fine with, by the way.
Yeah.
But I use LearnDash. I love it. It's one of the first that I remember, like really putting a stake in the ground and saying, like, online learning, this is what we do.
Yep.
And so that's a huge score for you all. Congrats.
Yeah. One guy went on Twitter this morning and said, "Is Chris Lema just buying all his favorite plugins?" And I'm like, yeah, that's one way to look at it, right?
Yeah. I mean, the ones you use are obviously there for a reason. So I think this is huge news. A couple weeks ago, our friends over at Yoast were acquired by Newfold Digital, or who we kind of know as Bluehost. And I thought, wow, that's really significant. We're seeing these big plugins like LearnDash, like Yoast, being taken off the market essentially by Stellar WP, or in their case, Newfold, or other acquisition people out in the space. I'm curious, like Chris, you've done a ton of M&A in your career. How can you characterize, if you take a step back, and I know you're a player in this, but if you take a step back and tell us what you're seeing in WordPress right now, like as I understand it, this is a roll up for sure.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that happens is when you grow a business, and you remember this from iThemes, right? You grow a business to the point where you're a multi-million-dollar entity. And you wake up one day and you realize, I don't know what's next. Like, I don't know what to do next. I don't have experience doing that. Like it wasn't scary when you were like, it's just me in my garage. And then it wasn't, it was a little scary when you were like, I'm going to hire the first or the second person, but then you got comfortable with that. And then you went up to say 10 people, and then 20 people scared you because you're staying up late at night just going, am I going to hit payroll, right? What happens in those summer months when all the revenue drops and you're like, why did I hire 2 new people last month, right? And so you have all that churning, right, of in your stomach of like, do I know what's next? I think, companies that have crossed into that threshold of over $1 million in annual recurring revenue, and especially if you get higher than that, right, 5 million, 10 million, I think you look around, it's rarefied air in the WordPress space, and I think you're left going, I would like some help. Like, I don't want to mess this up. Like, I want to figure this out. And I've heard that echoed from Tony at Sukuri, before they sold to GoDaddy, which is years ago, all the way up to, when we were talking to Yoast just like everybody else, right? And you have this desire to say, I don't want to quit this thing. I don't want to leave this thing, but I don't know if I know what to do next, right? I think the early phases of plugin product companies is often focused on the product feature. When you cross a certain line, you still have to do product, but you also have to do marketing, right? And how many times have we sat talking with owners of plugin companies where they're like, yeah, I don't know how to market this thing. I'm not a marketer, right? It's where our good friend Syed Balki, right, does so well, right, with Awesome Motive, is that the companies he's buying, he's able to say, I know how to solve this marketing problem for you, right? And they go, oh yes. So I think it's not a roll up across all of the WordPress ecosystem, but I do think as you move towards the larger entities and they go, maybe it'd be helpful to have the backing of a larger company, access to more marketing resources, access to budget. A lot of our companies that are self-funded, right? So you can't even. You remember when you were running iThemes? It's not like you could go, hey, let's go take $100,000 and bet it on some Facebook ads or something, because you're like,
Right.
dude, no, I got salaries and I got like I don't have an infinite well of funds, right? So
Yeah.
I think on the larger end of the spectrum, I think when you want to do experimentation, I think when you're shifting into big marketing, I think sometimes having a larger parent becomes useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love the way Stellar has done it. And, you basically just told my story for sure. It's exactly why when Liquid Web and our team started talking, it was like, well, the resources that Liquid Web has is pretty vast compared to what we had bootstrapped. Um, so I think it's an interesting day. And, we have the acquisition counter. And so you all at Liquid Web, Nexus, Stellar WP are forcing us to keep it up to date pretty regularly. But well, so congratulations. I think I want to switch gears. I want to talk about LearnDash and online learning, because when we talked the other day, I was like, Chris, this is an ideal fit for who you are. If anybody has been around you, talked to you, read your blog, for instance, like I look at the big umbrella is like you own this e-commerce category of thought leadership. And you do, like, I love your blog because I go, well, do I want to buy that plugin or not? Or what do I need? And I look at your blog. But underneath that, if anybody knows you and been following you for a while, online learning is your jam. Or at least that's my impression as your friend for a long time, like online learning. So when we were talking about this whole one acquisition and then your role change, I was like, oh, this is made in the making here for who you are, what you like to do. So I want to switch gears and just talk about that for a second. Just online learning. I know you have thoughts about it. I know you're excited about it. Tell me when I say the words online learning or LMS, what in the future do you see in this particular category or niche of WordPress and the bigger web ecosystem?
Well, we're seeing it already, right? Like, so the first wave of online learning, the first wave of online courses and everything else was done out of the universities, right? The universities, Berkeley and MIT and Harvard, Stanford, they all tried to create, or they went to create, right, platforms and places where they could publish their courses and let students take it, right? Initially, it was like an endorsement, then it was a little certificate, but they were playing in that space. And in that space, they didn't have to worry about monetization. They didn't have to worry about student enrollment. It was just sign up with a name and an email, and we'll give you access to these video courses and all that good stuff. And that wave worked for a while until other people, right? Domain experts, people who were good at calligraphy or at woodworking or anything else, wanted to put their course online. And we saw generic marketplace course platforms, right? The Udemy's of the world. And then we saw different platforms that actually were published, created just for online learning. So the Teachery and Thinkific and all those guys, right? And in that wave, where also plugins like LearnDash and Lifter LMS and Access Ally all jumped in, but in the second wave, we made it so that people could make a living, right? We've had this now second wave for a really long time where people could make a living just selling courses, right? And that's fantastic, right? I remember the first time I watched people create a landing page so they could sell their single course, right, without going anywhere else and just on WordPress. And I'm like, this is fantastic. But we didn't tell those people some things, right? Like, we didn't tell them, hey, by the way, you can't just be good at calligraphy. You can't just be good at, barbecuing beef. You have to be a marketer. You have to create landing pages. You have to create ads. You have to be a salesperson. You also have to be a support person. You also have to be a technology person. You got to figure out video and camera and lighting and audio. And you got to, upload this all and make sure you understand bit rates. And it was overwhelming, right? To the domain expert, they were like, wow, I'm taking on 6 more roles I didn't know I had to. And then the worst part about it was that, yes, they could make money, right? So yay, they made money. The problem was completion rates dropped through the floor. Like in phase 1, we didn't have a completion rate problem because you wanted a certificate from Stanford or Harvard or MIT. But in phase 2, while course instructors were able to make money, students were getting that fatigue, right? Of it's just 27 videos and 36 PDFs to download. And so completion rates dropped. There's a little thing that happens in your brain, right? You get this release of a chemical when you buy a course. And unfortunately, it's the same release of the chemical that happens when you complete a course. So imagine the joy that you get when you're like, yay, I bought that course. You've already gotten the release. So there's no need to be like, well, I should go through and do the whole course. So we watched in phase 2, all these platforms appear. And yet it took instructors, domain experts to roles they weren't ready for all the time. And completion rates for students dropped. And we said there has to be some other solution. So when you look at phase 3, the newest phase, which, COVID drove dramatically in the last year, we've seen so many people get that bump of online learning and online courseware and all that. In the third wave, what we're seeing is, hey, it can't be instructor does everything. There need to be feedback loops for the students, and students need to have a way to engage so that they can help each other. Now, you and I have been to this conference called Cabo Press, and we know that when you put a group of people together and you don't worry so much that the instructor is an instructor, instead you make them a facilitator of a conversation and people start connecting with each other, we know that amazing things happen. We've seen it year after year where people, when you gather them together, that's called a cohort. You put all the people together, you put them all in some moment in time, and you let them interact with each other and create their own feedback loops, create their own ability to initiate new concepts and ideas. And I think the third wave of online learning is all about that cohort. And so we're seeing people figure out how to do deeper connections to Zoom, deeper connections to chat and community. I mean, the number of community-based products, which are still courseware, right? But Mighty Networks and Circle.co and all these other players are all stepping into this space. And that's where, for me, I look at LearnDash and I go, we're headed that direction. Like we're going, it's not enough to just say video, PDF, download, and make it as wonderful it is. You have to get to the point where you can support a cohort and they can connect with each other and really, and what we see is when cohorts get together, completion rates also go up, right? So it's a win for not just the instructor, it's a win for the student.
I love that you said the word cohort because, as you know, I've been to Cabo Press a bunch of times. I've benefited personally from a cohort called an EO Forum for 10 plus years. I believe in the power of groups for sure. Something I'm continuing to try to push forward into post status as a community. So I love that. And I see it too. I totally see what you're saying and agree with it. The cohort base, I think about like Seth Godin and some of the things that he's doing over there is all cohort based learning.
Yep.
That's really, really, it seems like, okay, so when you talk back about the university system, it was like, well, this thing called the web is out here and it's a nuisance and we got to put them up there. So let's just jam them up there. And I think about the software that in the university days is Moodle, another open source project, PHP, I think. We had a developer, Glenn Ansley, that was a core contributor to that project before he came to iThemes. So this is not a new phenomenon necessarily. It's just been, would you say, poorly done? Like,
well, it's the challenge is that the whole time that we've been doing e-learning, we've been trying to stay in pace and even push forward the technology to drive what normally happens in person. And the problem is you're constantly delayed. Like you and I know, if I wanted to add a little chat box to the post status website and make it so that it was a chat box, but also it was moderated, whatever, we would look at like 50 products, they would all suck. And you're like, how do I do? So what are we left with? a Facebook group, a Slack group, a circle.co group, like somewhere else. It's not here, it's somewhere else, because those platforms, someone had to code them to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly limited by what's available and how well we can integrate it in. And I think that's the long thread of the narrative when it comes to online learning, is that we're like, hey, we know these things about learning, but how do we take that learning and bring it into environments? And frankly, the universities aren't any better at it, right? Or anywhere else, right? Because the universities will literally, I have sat in a room with a professor who talks about learning and the key things that a person needs to be able to learn something, all while they're standing in the front of the room in a non-interactive, unidirectional lecture. And you go, you realize your research just suggested that I needed something different, yet I'm in this environment where you're doing the thing that you do, right? And so it's this constant work to fight against what's the norm and take what we know about how people learn, right? There's knowledge gaps, there's skill gaps, all these different gaps, and you go, how do I create reinforcing loops to make that education make sense? And how do I use technology to do it?
And we learn best from each other, like in conversation, like we're doing right now. It's not just single lecture stuff. I mean, I think I don't have any research studies, but I just feel like that data is out there, is that we learn when we talk about in story, which you do well, and with peers.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. I continue to think about it for post test, because I mean, this phrase we hear a lot is on when you're building a membership site or whatever it is, community, is that they come for the content, they stay for the community. Post status, I think, is pretty special in that it has been content, will continue to be content, but I love, and I want to push into this in between the word camps, or now in between pandemics. This is the place to gather and to talk and to learn from each other. And so I'm curious, I'll be hitting you up next week and talking about, okay, Lema, help me plan out post status and how we get cohorts into there. So when this all relates to LearnDash, what's one thing you're most excited about it when we talk about all these phases and the next phase with this cohort focus?
Yeah, so I think the thing that's most exciting is we're coming alongside an existing team that has done a fantastic job. We're keeping all the people, we're keeping the product, we're keeping the lines, we're keeping everything, right? The partnerships and everything else. But we're adding to it, right? So if you talk to anybody inside of LearnDash, they'll tell you, well, we didn't do that, or we didn't because we didn't have enough resources, or well, we didn't market that because we didn't have enough resources, or we're looking at, and as we started doing the work to do the due diligence, evaluate it, the acquisition, all that, and when Joe our CTO invited me to step into the GM role, one of the first things we did was start allocating budget for resources. Like, let's go add some bodies to this. And so the thing that's most exciting is, how do you get an already market leading product to accelerate its growth, right? How do you drive that? And that includes more marketing, but it includes more product development and bringing more people in and bringing them in a way that supplements what is already happening that's great and not overtakes it. So there's a whole challenge, as you know, right? The first months post acquisition, when you're a small team and a product team, and then there's a large hosting company, and everyone freaks out, right? So on my calendar, I go, October and November is where every employee of LearnDash is going to be like, is this for real? Like, is it really the same? Is it not the same? What's changing? Who are the corporate overloads? And you're like, it really isn't changing. Like, we're all good. And then people kind of calm down and settle down. And then you go, okay, well, we're going to hit December, and you're going to go, great, let's plan for the next year and let's charge at it. Let's move at it. Let's run hard. So I'm not taking the foot off the gas, but I just know the next couple of months, there's a lot of just keeping people feeling, transition and people feeling safe. Like, my whole world didn't just turn upside down.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is part for the course. And I haven't been through that. Totally get it. It's the thing that you get all excited, but there's just this time and getting things settled in. Well, that'll be pumped. I'll be pumped to see what comes next with LearnDash. Okay, so you mentioned, I want to ask a couple of things in this kind of online learning space. Circle.so.
See, is it circle.so or circle.co?
Oh, that's good. I always mess them up. But Circle, it's been interesting. What are your thoughts about Circle? I've have a membership at a site that uses Circle for the community, and I don't know if I'm just old school or too old, Chris, but I'm like, how does this work? Like, it's not typical. It's a little bit different, and I feel like some things could get lost. But I'm curious because I see this kind of growing in adoption, interest. We use Slack, and thanks to Stellar WP, by the way, we're going to be rolling out premium Slack here pretty soon. That is actually the first announcement.
That's an announcement. It's an announcement. Yes. Stellar is supporting all this stuff. Yep.
Is supporting paid Slack finally at post status. So all the conversations that are there, whether you want them there or not, they're going to be there. They've been there all along. But we use Slack for post status, obviously, because it's the ubiquitous tool. All of us use it, so it's easy to just have another icon that says post status on it. But Circle, for people that maybe don't live on Slack, seems like a really interesting solution if you don't want to put it on a Facebook group.
Yep. And there's a bunch of them, right? So Mighty Networks, Circle.so, you were right, it's not CO, it's SO. Circle.so, Tribe. I think last week I found 4 others whose names I don't remember off the top of my head. There is a clear driver towards people figuring out how to do community. And it's amazing because we've now shifted the language from courses and membership to community, right? And that's the larger moniker. And so people go, oh, it's community, it's a platform for community. And you're like, what are you doing in your community? Oh, it's memberships and courses. And you're like, yeah, it's protected content, it's engaging content to train. And so there's several of those players out there. Most of them are just getting started, right? And I think that's part of why old guys like us get in there and they go, how does this work? Because they don't know how it works, right? They're like, we're trying to touch all the different personas in here. And so, we want to make sure that it's really community focused, but we also want to make sure that courseware players can use it. But we also want to make sure that if you have a membership, you can use it. And we also want to make a mobile. And so you're like, guys, you're all over the place. And that's what you expect in the V1s of an early kind of transition, is that they're all trying to figure out this community thing, because we went, 10, 15 years where community was equal to Facebook and Facebook groups. And when you leave that Facebook world and Slack for a small group of people, right? Small percentage of the planet, Slack was the next wave. For a different subset, Discord was the next wave. But those are not the same. And they're not the same as each other, but they're also not the same as what Facebook was doing. And then you get into what these new Mighty Networks, Circle.so, and several others are doing. And they're like, no, we want video, we want engagement, we want mini communities or smaller sets inside. We want communication, we want async, we want real time, we want mobile device so that you can go with your group the whole way you're going. And you go, yeah, I get it. It's just, it's going to take a little bit for it to get organized, and it's going to take a little bit for each, for the post-status community to figure out how do they do what they do best, right? We know in post-status, in the broader post-status community, there could easily be today 100 different people running 100 different cohort-based little learning mini groups. Call them 6-week challenges, right? Like 6 weeks. It's not, you don't have to build it for the next year. Just 6 weeks of 6 things, of 6 exercises that will help you in some way. We could do that ASAP, right? Now, the question is, what tools are you going to use? And it turns out that's where things start falling apart, because one person says, well, I was going to use it. Well, I was going to use this. Well, I'm just going to put this over here. And you go, that's where it's the challenge, right? So
you think it's early as far as Circle?
I think we're early, but my hope is that LearnDash and Post Status will go figure this out, and then we'll just solve it and go, here you go.
Sounds good. I love it. Yeah. Discourse forums. I was have a membership to a place that uses Discourse, and I was like, this is interesting. So I went down that trail. I went down the Circle trail with some of these others, and then it just all comes back to Slack. Now I know we're kind of an insular community, our techies, but last year, as distributed, demonstrated that, it's pushed the human race forward as far as remote work and things like that.
My son he's on a single Discord server with 2 Discord groups for one high school elective, which is not, it's a group, right? After class for theater. He's in 2 groups on a Discord server. He uses the mobile app, and him and all the classmates are just all day long. Hey, are you going to be at practice today? Or, rehearsal? Okay. Hey, you want to go get a bite to eat afterward? Okay. Let's all go meet at Sally's house. Mm-hmm. Everything is there. So when I ask, like, hey, do you have practice today and how long? He's not going to the official curriculum from the teacher. He's asking friends in the group, right? Like, it's a completely different model, decentralized, distributive communication modality among young people who don't need or care about a centralized player. And you go, okay, this is different, right? And they're meaning making, right? They're doing this whole process of figuring the world out among themselves and without an adult in the room, right? Mm-hmm. And he went to a summer camp, a space camp this summer in Los Angeles, but it was people flew in from everywhere to go to it. And they're on another Discord server, and they're still messaging each other now, right? And it's 2 months later, right? So people want to be connected. There's no question. Yeah. And they don't need rigor and structure to be connected. And I think a lot of times what happens with some of the tools is it imposes a certain hierarchy and rigid structure. And we've all grown accustomed, those of us that are the 1970 club and on. and so we like the control, we like the rigor, right? And yet for the younger generation, it's like, let's just see where it goes, right? And so then you start looking for tools that make that possible.
Well, so you talk about Discord. So my understanding is it's big. I mean, it started out with gamers.
Yep.
And so you got a tool there, which is interesting. A lot of kids, young people on Discord. It was actually brought up in our post at Slack about it because Discord is free, as I understand it, versus Slack, which is paid, obviously. So, it comes back to ubiquity. To me, is like, it really comes down to, Chris, to me, is like the login. How can you take the login crap off people's table? So like, Christian has Discord. Well, let's say he was of age and he wanted to join WordPress and he's following his dad's shoes here and everything. And, it would be compelling to say, well, for him, Discord makes sense because he's already got it in his kind of wheelhouse, his system or his workflow or whatever you want to call it, So that's interesting.
I think the login's one part of it, but I think the bigger dynamic is that fundamentally things are changing, right? Both in Slack and in Discord, the content is predominantly ephemeral. It disappears. It's there and then it's gone, like Twitter or anything else, right? And that's not the way we grew up learning. Right? The whole point of a threaded discussion group was that I could Google something, find the discussion. The discussion could be a year old, but all of it was documented there. And I can go read, oh, here's how I do this, or here's what I tweak here, or here's an error code that I got, someone else got, and here's how they fixed it. That was all there. It was static. There was a sense of permanence in a forum, right? And in discussions. There's no permanence in Slack or Discord in the same way. Now, again, I think you can pay Slack to hold on to it, but you're going to be searching and finding random things. It's not the same. And it's definitely not the same when you come from the outside and you're Googling something. So we've changed the nature of how these conversations and communities go. The threaded discussion group was static, permanent, and helped other people in an asynchronous way. Here, this is asynchronous communication that's ephemeral. It's a completely different ballgame. My son doesn't know how to go back and find the information about the pizza party on Saturday 2 weeks later because it's just gone. He doesn't care. It's just moved on, right? So when you're talking about learning, part of the challenge is figuring out it's not, yes, login is easy because it's where you're at. In the same way that, people still used Facebook forever because they still had Facebook on their phone. They still were using it to post pictures for their grandma or whatever it was. And so then they'd see the little, blurb and go, "Ooh, my Facebook group has an update. And since I'm already here, I'll go look at it." But the bigger dynamic is, how do you build a community that is worth logging into? How do you create something that is worth being in? And part of that requires permanence. If it's all ephemeral and all disappears, who cares? Because it's not going to be there when you need it, right? And that's the challenges today. I think we've pivoted to all these platforms where there's just they call the Facebook and Twitter and Slack. They all have a different name for the list of messages, but they're all just disappearing because we've become victims of the algorithm, right? And I think for learning, you got to get away from the algorithm and just create some place where things just exist.
Right. I know. I keep thinking I wish Slack would have some kind of docs or something, because it does. There's so much 6+ years at just Slack at post status that is right now it's locked because we haven't upgraded yet, but it's there. But who has time to go search all that stuff?
Yeah.
Who has time to try to find that and remember what word you used? Okay, Chris and I talked about this probably 3 years ago, and try to search through our DMs and stuff. I totally see that, because so much just kind of, it's like if you don't stay on the radar, it passes you by. But I can see the ramifications for online learning for sure. Okay, so as we kind of wrap this up, and I'm really pumped, I want to continue to talk about online learning, because I think this definitely is our present, but also our future. And so many things, like this is just a great time for you all to get LearnDash and to take next steps with it. And I'm really excited. But any last takeaways you have about online learning, LearnDash, or whatsoever?
Yeah, so I think the thing we haven't talked about yet, and the one that isn't getting announced in the same way on Twitter and in the press release and everything else, is Liquid Web and Nexus are still hosting companies, right? And one of the challenges we know when you start building out learning stuff and you have a lot of people logging in is that $5 hosting and inexpensive shared hosting won't solve your problems, right? Things start falling apart. So right away, as we made the announcement this morning, someone wrote back and said, "Hey, so are you going to do any connection between, say, LearnDash and the hosting plans?" And you're like, absolutely. Like, of course we want, we're not saying you have to be a Nexus customer to use LearnDash. You can use LearnDash anywhere, but we will start working on creating a special bundle, a special package that allows you to have best-in-class hosting with your LearnDash plugin, so that you don't have the drama of, oh, suddenly I started getting 502 errors, or this thing went down, or what have you. So that is very exciting to me, because it solves a real pain for some people where they're like, I don't know why LearnDash isn't working. And you're like, it's not LearnDash, right? It's your hosting. So let's go get a better hosting package. So I think that's really interesting. I think the other thing is, it's part of the Stellar brand of plugins. And, what does it look like when you want to start combining Restrict Content Pro and LearnDash, right? Or when you want to integrate LearnDash on top of, say, Cadence theme, right? And so I think there's a lot of exciting, we're getting to that, you get enough mass where now every new entrant, every new product that you bring into the family creates all these other crisscross lines of integrations that can help everybody grow. So that, I think the opportunity there is a huge win for customers, right? The ability to say, oh, now that you own two of my favorite plugins, are you going to finally make them connect? And you go, yeah, let's go do that. And the beneficiary is the customer.
Yep. It's just me on both those counts. So.
Yes. Well, it's also me, right? They go looking in and they're like, hey, you own this, and I'm like, yes, I have a license for all these.
Yep. Got to. All right, Chris Lema, congratulations again to Liquid Web and all your team, and for your new role as GM of LearnDash. It's going to be an exciting day, but thanks for talking to us about online learning, and I'll see you in like T-minus 7 days.
That's right. I can't wait.